It's hard to imagine that an entire colony that was home to over 100 people could just vanish into thin air.
It's the oldest missing persons case in America. And yet today, there are more people dedicated to solving it than ever before.
Imagine a whole colony of people vanishing without a trace, leaving behind only a cryptic message. For over 400 years, the disappearance of the Roanoke colony has baffled historians and archaeologists alike.
They're searching land, sea, and even DNA to find the answer. Perhaps one day soon, the lost colony of Roanoke will finally be found.
Picture this, an entire settlement gone, no bodies, no battle scars, just a single word carved into wood. What if I told you that this mystery might finally be solved?
The search for the lost colony of Roanoke turns up nothing but tantalizing clues and dead ends. Then, in the late 1930s, a treasure trove of new evidence is unearthed.
Recent discoveries hint that the lost colonists didn't just disappear, they may have blended into a world we're only now uncovering. Stick with me as we unravel the latest clues that could rewrite the story of America's lost colony. So how did this whole mystery even start? Let's rewind to the late 16th century, when England was itching to plant its flag in the New World. Enter Sir Walter Raleigh. Think of him as the cool, adventurous guy with a knack for convincing queens. He sweet-talked Queen Elizabeth I into letting him set up a colony across the Atlantic, promising riches, resources, and a foothold against Spain. The plan was ambitious: establish a permanent English settlement in what's now North Carolina. But as you'll see, ambition doesn't always mean success. The first stab at this came in 1585. Raleigh sent about 100 men, led by Ralph Lane, to Roanoke Island, a little spit of land off the coast. They built a small settlement, but things went south fast. Supplies ran low, and the local Socotan tribe wasn't exactly thrilled to have these newcomers crashing their territory. Tensions boiled over when Lane's men killed a Socotan leader, Wingina, in a skirmish. By 1586, the colonists were fed up, hungry, homesick, and probably regretting the whole trip. Lucky for them, Sir Francis Drake swung by with his fleet, and they jumped ship back to England. Attempt 1 a total bust. Raleigh, though, wasn't the type to throw in the towel. In 1587, he tried again, this time with a bigger vision. He sent 115 settlers, men, women, and kids, to Roanoke, aiming for a real community, not just a military outpost. John White, an artist with a talent for maps, was put in charge as governor. Among the group was White's daughter Eleanor, who was pregnant when they landed. Soon after arriving, she gave birth to Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas. It felt like a fresh start, a little spark of hope in the wilderness, but hope doesn't fill empty stomachs. The settlers quickly realized they didn't have enough supplies to last. They begged White to sail back to England for help, and after some arm twisting, he agreed. Before he left, he made a deal with them. If they had to abandon the settlement, they'd carve a Maltese cross into a tree as a distress signal. Otherwise, they'd leave a note about where they'd gone. Simple enough, right? Well, not quite. White's trip back was a nightmare. He hit England just as the Anglo-Spanish War kicked off, and the Spanish Armada had everyone scrambling. Ships were commandeered to fight, leaving White stuck on the sidelines. It took 3 long years, until August 1590, before he could return to Roanoke. When he finally stepped ashore, his heart must have sank. The place was a ghost town. No settlers, no signs of a fight, just eerie silence. The houses were gone, dismantled neatly like someone had packed up and left on purpose, and there, carved into a wooden post, was the word Croatoan. Nearby, a tree bore the letters Crow. No Maltese cross, no hint of panic, just those cryptic clues. Croatoan wasn't random. It was the name of a nearby island now called Hatteras, and the tribe that lived there. White figured the colonists had moved to join their Croatoan neighbors, maybe for food or safety. He wanted to sail there and check, but the weather had other plans. Storms battered his ship, forcing him back to England without answers. He never saw his daughter or granddaughter again, and the Roanoke colony slipped into legend. What happened to those 115 souls? That's the question that's kept us guessing for centuries. Picture John White stepping onto Roanoke Island in 1590, expecting a reunion with his family and friends. Instead, he's met with nothing. No welcoming party, no signs of life, just a deserted settlement staring back at him. The houses, dismantled, not destroyed. The fortifications taken down like someone had tidied up before leaving, and those carvings, Croatoan on a post, crow on a tree, were the only whispers of where they might have gone. Talk about a cliffhanger! What was White supposed to make of this? The lack of chaos was the first big puzzle piece. No bodies, no blood, no broken weapons, nothing to suggest a massacre or a desperate last stand. The Maltese cross he'd told them to carve in distress was nowhere to be found, which meant they hadn't fled in a panic. It looked deliberate, like the colonists had decided to pick up and move somewhere else. But where? Croatoan Island, just 50 miles south, seemed the obvious answer. The Croatoan tribe had been friendly-ish with the settlers, and the name was right there, literally spelled out for White. He must have thought, okay, they've gone to hang out with the neighbors. Except he couldn't confirm it. The weather turned nasty, think howling winds and crashing waves, and his crew refused to risk sailing to Hatteras. White had no choice but to head back to England, leaving the mystery wide open. Can you imagine the frustration? Your whole colony, including your daughter and granddaughter, vanishes, and you're stuck with a cryptic post-it note and no way to follow up. Back home, word of the disappearance spread, but with no hard evidence, people started filling in the blanks themselves. Some whispered that the colonists had been wiped out by hostile tribes, revenge for that earlier Secatan mess maybe. Others figured they'd starved or caught some nasty disease, dropping like flies in the wilderness. A few optimists suggested they'd packed up and joined the Croatoans, blending into native life to survive, but without proof it was all just talk. England had bigger problems, like fighting Spain, so Roanoke faded into a creepy footnote. What makes this so wild is how little there was to go on. Most disappearances leave something behind. Bones, wreckage, a smoking gun. Here, just 2 carvings and a whole lot of quiet. It's like the colonists wanted to keep us guessing, and guess we did. For over 400 years, this puzzle has hooked everyone from historians to playwrights. For White, though, it wasn't a fun riddle. It was a gut punch he'd never recover from. Okay, so you've got a missing colony, a couple of carved words, and 0 bodies. What do you do with that? If you're human, you start guessing, and boy, did people guess. Over the centuries, the Roanoke mystery spawned theories that range from, yeah, maybe, to, did you just make that up? Let's sift through some of the big ones. First up, the massacre theory. After that rocky start with the Secatan tribe in 1585, some figured the Native Americans had had enough of these English intruders. Maybe they attacked, killed everyone, and hid the evidence. It's a grim thought, and it fits the dangers of the time. But here's the snag. No bones, no weapons, no signs of a fight. The settlement looked too neat for a slaughter, like someone had swept up before the credits rolled. Then there's the disease angle. The New World was a petri dish for epidemics, smallpox, influenza, you name it. Maybe the colonists caught something nasty and died off quick. It's not a bad idea. European settlers often brought germs that wrecked whole communities. But where were the graves? And how did they manage to carve Croatoan if they were all dropping dead? It doesn't quite add up. A cheerier take was assimilation. What if the colonists, running low on food and hope, turned to the Croatoan tribe for help? The carvings pointed right to Hatteras Island, and the tribe wasn't openly hostile. Maybe they moved there, traded their English hats for native ways, and just kept living. It's a nice story, survival instead of tragedy, and those carvings give it some weight. Later explorers even heard rumors of blue-eyed Native Americans speaking English, though that could have been wishful thinking. Some went darker, suggesting the settlers tried sailing back to England on their own. Picture them cobbling together a rickety boat, only to get swallowed by the Atlantic. Dramatic, sure, but they didn't have the ships or skills for that kind of trip. No wreckage ever turned up either, so it's a long shot. And then there's the truly out there stuff. In the 1800s, someone floated the idea that aliens snatched the colonists, or maybe a supernatural curse did them in. I mean, it's a fun campfire tale, but unless E.T. left that Croatoan note, we can toss that one out with a laugh. All these guesses kept the mystery alive, turning Roanoke into a cultural obsession, but without hard proof, they were just stories. Intriguing, sure, but missing the meat. That's where things sat for ages, until shovels and science started digging up real answers. For a long time, Roanoke was all questions and no answers. But in the last decade, archaeologists have been pulling back the curtain with some jaw-dropping finds. From 2015 to 2024, the dirt's been spilling secrets that might just solve this 400-year-old whodunit. Ready to see what they've uncovered? It kicked off in 2015 with a map, John White's own hand-drawn La Virginie à Pars. This wasn't just a pretty picture, it had a hidden clue. Researchers from the First Colony Foundation noticed a patch covering part of the map, like White had doodled over a mistake. Using X-ray spectroscopy, fancy stuff, they peeked underneath and found an X, marking a spot 50 miles inland near the Chowan River. It looked like a symbol for a fort or settlement. Did the colonists plan to move there? To find out, they started digging at what's now called Site X. What they found got pulses racing, colonial-era pottery, bits of metal, signs of English life. Not enough to account for all 115 settlers, but enough to say, some of them were here. It suggested the group might have split up, with a chunk heading inland to a safer spot with better resources. Suddenly, the idea of relocation wasn't just a theory, it had dirt under its nails. Fast forward to 2020, and another site in Bertie County, North Carolina turned up more goodies. Archaeologists unearthed bale seals, little tags for cloth shipments, and pottery shards that screamed English. Mixed in were hints of Native American influence like local-style tools. This wasn't just a pit stop. It looked like the settlers had settled in and started mingling with the locals. The assimilation theory was looking less like a hunch and more like a lead. But the real fireworks came in 2024, two digs that might have sealed the deal. First, on Hatteras Island, Old Croatoan, Scott Dawson and the Croatoan Archaeological Society hit pay dirt. They pulled up pottery that blended English and native styles, copper jewelry and tools, showing both cultures at work. Dated to the late 1500s, these finds screamed, "The colonists were here!" Even better, they found signs of English farming techniques, rows and methods the Croatoans wouldn't have used on their own. This wasn't just a visit, it was a new life, side by side with the tribe. Then, at the Elizabethan Gardens near the original Roanoke site, the First Colony Foundation struck gold again in May 2024. They dug up Algonquian pottery from the 1500s, standard stuff for the area, but then bam, a copper ring. Copper was a big deal for Native Americans, tied to spirituality and status, often worn by warriors. Finding it with English artifacts wasn't just cool, it was a neon sign pointing to cultural exchange. Dr. Eric Klingelhofer, a big name on the team, said it best, "This pottery and that ring, we're in the middle of a settlement where English and Native lives crossed paths." These 2024 finds flipped the script. The Croatoan carving wasn't a dead end, it was a roadmap. The bulk of the colonists likely hauled themselves to Hatteras, teamed up with the Croatoans, and made it work. The evidence isn't some vague maybe, it's pottery you can hold, jewelry you can see, proof of two worlds colliding and sticking together. And that copper ring, it's not just bling, it hints at a bond deeper than trade, maybe even families forming across cultures. This isn't guesswork anymore, it's history coming into focus. The Roanoke colonists didn't vanish, they adapted, survived, and left their mark in ways we're only now appreciating. So, the colonists didn't just disappear, they moved in with the Croatoans, but what did that look like? Those 2024 finds, pottery copper tools, aren't just relics. They're snapshots of two cultures figuring each other out. Let's unpack this blending of lives and see what it says about survival in the New World. Take that copper ring from the Elizabethan Gardens. For the Native Americans, copper wasn't some shiny trinket. It was sacred, a symbol of power and spirit. Finding it among English stuff means more than a swap at a trading post. It suggests trust, maybe even respect, between the settlers and the Croatoans. Did a colonist earn it through friendship? Did a native warrior marry into the group? We can't know for sure, but it's a clue that this wasn't a one-way street. The pottery backs this up. On Hatteras, archaeologists found pieces that mixed English shapes with native designs. Think European bowls with Algonquian flair. That's not accidental. It's what happens when people share a kitchen. The settlers likely learned local ways of cooking and crafting, while the Croatoans picked up a few English tricks. Survival demanded it. Cut off from England, the colonists couldn't wait for shipments. They had to grow food, build shelters, and live like their neighbors. And it wasn't just about stuff. Later explorers like John Smith from Jamestown heard tales of Native Americans with European features. Blonde hair, blue eyes, speaking bits of English. Were these the Roanoke survivors' kids? Hard to prove, but the 2024 digs make it less of a stretch. DNA studies have poked at this too, with some Lumbee tribe members in North Carolina claiming Roanoke roots. The science isn't solid yet, but the story's gaining traction. This assimilation wasn't charity, it was practical. The Croatoans got new tools and allies. The colonists got food and know-how. Imagine an English settler learning to fish with a native net, or a Croatoan kid playing with a metal knife for the first time. It's a slow dance of give and take, turning strangers into something closer, and in a harsh, unfamiliar land, that could have been the difference between life and death. What's cool here is how it flips the usual colonial tale. This isn't Europeans steamrolling in, it's two groups meeting in the middle. The Roanoke story starts to feel less like a tragedy and more like a quiet triumph of human grit and flexibility. The Roanoke colonists may have faded into native life, but their story didn't end there. It left a mark that's stretched across centuries, shaping how America grew and how we see ourselves. Let's explore how this little lost colony became a big deal. Practically speaking, Roanoke was a wake-up call. When Jamestown rolled around in 1607, the English had learned a thing or two. Don't skimp on supplies, check. Pick a spot you can defend, check. And maybe don't tick off the locals right away. Jamestown still had its disasters, starvation anyone? But it stuck, partly because Roanoke showed what not to do. The lost colony was like a rough draft, helping the next guys get it right, but Roanoke's real staying power is in the imagination. It's America's original ghost story, 115 people gone poof with just a word scratched in wood. That hooked people early on. By the 1800s, Virginia Dare, that first English baby, was a legend. Writers turned her into everything from a tragic heroine to a magical white doe roaming the wilds. It's cheesy now, but back then, it was pure romance, a symbol of innocence lost to the frontier. Today, you can catch that vibe at the Fort Raleigh National Historic Site. Since 1937, they've been putting on The Lost Colony, an outdoor play that's one of America's longest-running shows. Tourists flock to it, soaking up the mystery with popcorn and bug spray. It's not just nostalgia, it's a reminder of how deep this tale runs in our cultural DNA. And it's not all fluff. The assimilation angle from those 2024 finds adds a twist to the history books. Roanoke wasn't just a failure, it was an early hint of how European and native lives could intertwine. That messy human mix set a tone for what America would become. A place where cultures crash, clash, and sometimes blend into something new. It's not the tidy conquerors win story we often hear. It's raw, realer. For historians, Roanoke's a gold mine too. Every artifact dug up, like that copper ring, sparks new questions about those first shaky steps of colonization. It's a puzzle that keeps giving, pushing us to rethink the past. And for regular folks, it's a dang good yarn, proof that truth can be wilder than fiction.